have to tell you something that happened to me this morning. Usually I get to church about maybe an hour or so before Mass starts just to make sure everything's gotten together. And I was running late, so I got here about 15 minutes prior to Mass. And I pull up in a parking lot, and there's no one here. I think you know what I'm talking about, don't you? I got here, and everything's closed up and dark. And, of course, my guilt kicks in, and I'm thinking, yeah, they probably knew I was doing the homilies this weekend. So they just kind of... I was afraid to tell Father Ryan that because I'm sure he would have said that right out of my mouth. My mom and dad grew up during the Depression when things were very hard on people living in the United States at that time. And it wasn't as hard on my mom's family because my grandfather, her dad, had a job yet. But my father, who lost both his parents when he was 7, his older brother took over, and he lost his job, who was taking care of the family. So they had a much difficult time. They didn't have much to begin with, and they had even less when the Depression hit. And he gained an instillment of worth ethic and knowledge. And he instilled me in that value of education and the value of succeeding when you try. And when you try, success comes to you. And because of that, when I entered college, every summer vacation, every Christmas vacation, and every Easter vacation, he had me working in the steel foundry in Milwaukee. He says, I'm going to teach you what a real job is and how it is to really work with your hands. And so this way you'll have a greater appreciation of your education when you go back to school. So you'll gain something and make something better of yourself than he had done for himself. And he told me, Dale, there's one thing that a depression or anyone else can't take away from you, and that's the education that you've got within your mind. So learn and learn it well. Nearly all of us wants to achieve much in one way or another. After all, most of us from the time we are children have been told constantly and encouraged that the very thing that we need to do is succeed. We're told that by our parents, our teachers, our friends, and even our spouses. And because of that encouragement, many of us have worked hard to achieve our goals that we have today. Some of us have spent a lot of time studying and doing homework with the hope that we would get good grades and eventually get a decent job. Some of us have spent hours on the practice field and in the weight room, striving to be the best athlete that we could ever be. And some of us simply tried to be the most popular person that everyone wanted to be around. And yes, most of us, at some point growing up, hoped to be good at something that we could take with us during our lives. As adults, many of us continued on that same path, trying hard to make something of ourselves, to be a success at whatever we endeavor to do. And adults usually keep score in a particular way of their success or lack of success by the externals that we can see. How many of us, if we are truly honest, look at people with a nicer house or a higher paying job or a better looking husband or wife or someone who has more friends and think, boy, I really wish I could trade places with that person and have what they have? The fact is that sometimes we look at others and see people who seem to be a lot more successful than we are. We all want to get to that finish line of whatever goals we have set for ourselves. To me, that makes perfect sense. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. With that feeling, that way of living, or for wishing that we could achieve more in our lives. It's actually worthwhile, even holy, to strive to do well in all our areas of life, be it at school, at work, at play, in our relationships, or in our marriage. My guess is that in today's gospel, Jesus was providing his listeners, and that means us here today too, with a kind of blueprint for what a successful life looks like. In the context of today's feast, it tells us how to become a saint, and we all know it as the Beatitudes. And if you let me use a little modern language today, you might call it becoming a saint for dummies. Today we gather to celebrate All Saints' Day, a day on which we remember and ask the prayers and give thanks for the countless men and women who have gone before us in their faith. It's as if the church is saying to us today, if you want to know what following Jesus looks like, take a look at the life of St. Paul, St. Stephen, St. Elizabeth Seton, St. Dorothy Day, St. Maximilian Kolbe, or at all the anonymous thousands and thousands of saints that the church puts before us each day. Each of these men and women, in their own individual way, walk the journey of faith and live the Beatitudes in their own particular way. And yet, each of their stories was completely unique. Some of these holy men and holy women had much materially, and some had virtually nothing. Some had the power and influence at a certain amount of fame during the time that they were alive on earth. Some were hardly known outside their small town, convent, or monastery. Some had towering intellects. Some were simple and uneducated. Some had somewhat shady pasts. Don't even think about it, Father. While some had pasts with squeaky clean living. Some were natural-born leaders, and some were quite shy and unassuming. Some were driven and motivated to God's will from as far back as they could remember. And some, like myself, I'm not calling myself a saint though, but had to be coaxed and coaxed and coaxed again, kicking and screaming as they went along the way. In other words, some achieved a certain amount of success by worldly standards, while many struggled mightily just to get by. Yet, in one way or another, each one of them or her, in their own way, embraced and lived out the Beatitudes. They were flesh and blood. They had their strengths and weaknesses. They were people of appetites and longings, ambitions and disappointments, vanities and odd behavior. They were simply sinners just like the rest of us. And they were open to allowing God to work through them. And when they allowed God to work through them, wonderful things happened. And so the Beatitudes can be a kind of measuring stick for us today, a way of examining whether or not we are embracing the kinds of lives the Lord is asking us to live. Are we allowing God to make something of ourselves? Are we on the right path? And will we be able to show the world that, through our actions, that true wealth involves being poor in spirit, knowing that we are not the center of the universe and that we need God for everything. True strength involves being peaceful men and women who work tirelessly to build bridges rather than seeking conflict. True courage involves loving even in the face of persecution or disappointment, even when our love is not returned to us like we wanted to. True wisdom involves being hungry and thirsty for righteousness, wanting to do the right thing in every situation, no matter what the cost of doing that right thing will be for us. True power involves showing mercy and forgiveness to those who have wronged us, rather than trying to seek revenge on those people. These are the kind of things we are all about. And you know, it's a tall order to fill. These are to be our attitudes. Put simply, this is the way of life God is calling us to live. Will we answer his call? And so, whether we are successful or not by worldly standards, whether we have much or little, All Saints' Day reminds us of our great potential that we have within us, the promise that lies for us to fulfill. May our striving to reach our goals in this life not get in the way of the goals that God has set for us to fulfill. And may the saints show us how to accomplish this. All holy women and holy men, pray for us.